It's good to be a sleeping beauty. Even if you don't wait for the prince, at least you'll get some sleep. Folk art. Tell me, Corona, I thoughtfully stroke Behemoth, who with truly royal impudence refuses to get off my hands, although we have not only flown to Babylon but also reached my cabin. Where, and most importantly why, did you put the Hatak? Which, I remember exactly, was hanging in orbit around the planet near the station. The question, of course, was completely rhetorical. I knew perfectly well where one of my ships was now located. The girls had driven it to the opposite side of the planet, making the pyramid inaccessible even to the sensors of the Minbari cruisers, not to mention the Babylon systems. And I could have found the answer to the question why, just as well by simply looking through the data from the Replicator network. But for some reason I still found it more enjoyable to have a normal, and completely irrational in Coroni's opinion, conversation at a speed normal for all sentient beings. Such a large ship near a diplomatic station, the girl shrugged, can in itself serve as a point of concentration of tension. Therefore I decided to remove the irritating factor from the locals' line of sight. Are you just too lazy to solve potential problems? You can think as you like. The girl twitched her ear with an independent look, glancing sideways at the cat, who responded to her with an intent cat look. You just got lazy. I nod. Well, in any case, I'm glad that you and Yuki didn't cause any trouble while I was away from the station. Although I paused for a split second, confirming my assumption via the Replicator network. You practically cleared the warehouse of your favorite pastry shop of its stock of pastries. An emotion came from Caron through the Replicator network, most similar to the standard female, "Oh, that's it," making me raise an eyebrow in surprise. I definitely didn't program this when I created her personality. And that was great, if you think about it. Both long-eared androids, Coron and Yuki, continued to independently develop the personality matrices embedded in them, and as far as I understood, Yuki developed even faster than her older sister, relying on the experience already existing in the databases in many matters. That is why a semblance of a slight feeling of guilt was coming from her now, however, heavily mixed with complete satisfaction with her own life. Well, I sigh. In any case, you did well. Behemoth. Mr. Urha came from the cat via subspace communication. The station and its inhabitants are at your complete disposal. Explore, study. If you are confident in your invisibility, read everyone who arouses your interest, except, for now, the Vorlon ambassador. I cannot be sure that he will not notice you in his consciousness. You must be able to close your consciousness. It's not difficult. The cat jumped off my lap, stretching demonstratively like a cat, leaving a few barely noticeable scratches from its claws on the floor. In any case, if someone pins me down, I can always use the teleportation module that's hanging around the station. You can, I nod, but only as a last resort. Behemoth narrowed his eyes, transmitting an emotion of agreement over the link, and, proudly throwing up both tails, confidently moved towards the exit of the cabin. Well, I hope you won't cause too much panic and disorder at a particular station. Well, nevertheless, my absence from the station did not pass without a trace. What can I say? If during the past period people managed to lose their own president, killed during another flyby of colonies and extraterrestrial objects right on the presidential liner, which was supposed to be guarded no tighter than a maximum security prison, Garibaldi, is always poking his nose into all suspicious events, got shot in the back and was now resting in the infirmary pretending to be an interior item. Even the ambassadors got out of hand. Drekar had disappeared from the station somewhere, and even his attaché, it seems, was not particularly aware of it, trying to put a good face on a bad game and representing Narn at the meetings of the station council. And Delenn decided to pretend to be a butterfly, wrapped in some kind of cocoon made of web. However, given what I remembered of the events, I wouldn't mind pinching off a piece of this web, or better yet, Ambassador Delenn for good measure, and carefully studying it under a microscope. The technology that allows one to so easily rebuild the DNA of an adult-formed organism into a hybrid species without any negative consequences for health. This is a very tasty technology. Where else can I quietly get hold of a triluminary? Lenyo won't give it to me, right? Although, who said that he should know? The smile of the Grinch from the cartoon of the same name automatically appeared on my face. Interlude. Stephen Franklin tiredly rubbed his eyes, putting aside the tablet with the latest patient scan data. Just like yesterday, and the day before yesterday, and the day before. It didn't change the situation. Garibaldi was still in a coma, and the medic had already run out of options for solving the problem. As he had already told Ivanova, who went to the infirmary almost every day to visit her friend and colleague, now the medics had done everything in their power. And since Michael had not regained consciousness, all that was left was to rely on his own strength and thirst for life. But Stephen knew very well how rarely patients in such situations came out of a vegetative state. Even now, in the bright future, with all the new technologies and drugs, little has changed in medicine. The patient either came out of a coma almost immediately after eliminating the cause of such a state, or remained a vegetable, losing every day even the remaining chances for improvement of the situation. After allowing himself a few moments to just sit still, resting his eyes and body as a whole, Franklin stood up resolutely and, casting a grim glance at Garibaldi lying in the box, headed for the exit of the medical bay. It seemed time to turn to less, traditional medicine. But first he needed to find the captain. Sheridan was found in one of the cafes in the station's recreation area, sipping juice from a glass with a peaceful look. Having spotted him in the crowd, the doctor purposefully moved towards the commander of the Babylon. "Doctor?" Sheridan smiled affably. "How are you? Always busy, I see?" "Yes. As always, sometimes there is not even time to eat properly. Do you have a minute, Captain?" "Of course," the man nodded. "I'm meeting my sister today, but her plane is still half an hour away, so yeah, I'll find a minute. By the way, how's Mr. Garibaldi?" "To tell the truth, it's bad," the doctor sighed. "Actually, it was about Garibaldi that I wanted to talk. We tried everything we could, but it was of little use. Michael is not coming out of his coma. There are 2 more options, but..." Franklin hesitated. "They are not provided for by the rules, and they can have consequences." "I understand. Have you contacted your relatives?" "As far as I know, in such situations they should have the final say." "I tried," Stephen shook his head, "but it didn't work. And we don't have time. If we delay, Michael won't get out of it. We've already been dragging it out until the very last moment. What are the options? Last year I got my hands on an alien device that transfers life energy from one sentient being to another." Franklin lowered his voice to a whisper, although, given the standard hubbub of visitors in the establishment, it would be unlikely that anyone other than the captain would hear him, even if he spoke at full volume. Obviously, it was originally intended for carrying out the death penalty. "That doesn't sound very life-affirming," Sheridan frowned. "It can be used at a lower power. With the right settings, it can be used for treatment at a lower power." "The negative effect on the donor will not cause excessive harm, of course," Franklin clarified, "if you do not do it constantly, but allow the body to restore its strength." "Are you speaking from personal experience?" No, I haven't used it myself, but I've seen it happen and talked to the donor. I understand that the risk is inevitable," the man sighed, "and the use of unstudied alien technologies is not approved in itself. Therefore, I decided to get your approval." "You talked about 2 options." John thoughtfully twirled the glass in his hands, trying to understand how ready he was to agree to the doctor's proposal. "The second," the doctor hesitated. "A few months ago, an alien boy was brought to the medical bay. He had breathing problems. In general, we could have easily saved him, but it required an operation. An elementary one." Franklin waved his hand. "He would have gotten out of bed in a day and forgotten about the disease, but his parents, for religious reasons, they refused surgical intervention." "You must respect other religions, Doctor." Sheridan shook his head, although deep down he completely agreed with the doctor's unspoken attitude on this matter. No religion was worth, and should never be worth, the life and health of a reasonable person, especially a small boy. "I understand," Stephen nodded. "We didn't conduct the operation, but..." Then Lord Baal had only recently appeared on the station but had already managed to establish himself and his empire as an extremely highly developed community, highly developed both socially and technologically. So I thought that there would be nothing wrong if I at least asked him if he could help save the child. And he could? Sheridan raised an eyebrow with interest. Of course he could. I've never seen such technology, and I'm not even sure if it was technology. He cured the boy by laying on his hands. Literally. Eh? Was all the stunt captain could squeeze out.
My reaction was about the same. But at that time, Lord Baal made it clear that he did not want the general public to know about him. Well, you must know all those ancient stories about wizards and healers to whom whole lines of sufferers lined up, and how these stories always ended. I gave my word, Captain. Franklin looked meaningfully at Sheridan. Don't worry, this information won't go anywhere further than me, Sheridan thought. But we need to do something anyway, otherwise Garibaldi won't survive. Yes, Captain. Let's do it this way. Prepare everything that is required to use the alien device, but first I'll try to approach the Ambassador, Lord Baal, with a conversation. After all, I can just drop in and meet you, right? Yes, I think that would be the best option. Excellent. Sheridan finished his juice in one gulp and put the glass on the table. Then now I'll still try not to miss my sister's arrival, and then I'll deal with our little problem. I'll contact you on the communicator when there is news. Franklin and Sheridan nodded briefly to each other, saying goodbye, and headed off in opposite directions to do their own thing. They left, accompanied by a very attentive and intelligent look from a black fluffy two-tailed cat who was lounging nearby on the pedestal of one of the decorative statues that adorned the room. Interesting. Behemoth seems to have fully embraced the role of a telepath spy. With irrepressible enthusiasm, he began to roam around the station and sniff out everything most interesting and useful. And this behavior has already begun to bear fruit. Just a few minutes ago, the furry telepath witnessed a conversation between the captain and the head of the medical service, discussing what to do with Garibaldi, who occupied the government bed and insidiously did not want to come out of a coma and return to his official duties.
No, the fact that Franklin remembered the story of the healing of the alien boy was not a surprise to me. On the contrary, I was pleasantly surprised that he came to the idea of my help only now, when all other options were truly exhausted. And in this particular case, I, in general, saw no reason not to provide him with his help. Babylon 5 without its chief, Paranoid, is not Babylon 5. Well, if Captain Sheridan really did deign to come in for tea, it would be impolite to refuse the man outright, wouldn't it? Besides, the Earth engineers had done a good job with their prototype ship, having wisely applied the technologies I had given them. The Cavados was still nothing special, like the White Stars of the near future, but even now a frigate capable of causing trouble to many ships of a larger caliber commanded respect. If the Earth Commonwealth produced at least 100 of these for its fleet, the balance of power in the political arena of the galaxy could change considerably.
It would be interesting to see the results. And the results should be even in the near future. This is not an embassy yacht, even if it is almost the size of the station. Calvados was a pure military frigate, and the appearance of such a ship in neutral space near a diplomatic station that guarantees security and political equality. It is difficult to say what the officials on Earth were thinking about when they dispatched a new ship to catch Tragati. In the canonical history, Sheridan, as far as I remembered, flew in on his Agamemnon, then, after the resolution of the crisis, handed it over to a new captain and sent it home immediately. The frigate was handed over to John, which means that until other orders were received, he was its commander with all the ensuing consequences. And knowing the captain, knew the great
Lord Baal. An incoming call signal sounded on the terminal, and a second later the face of the newly minted station commander appeared on the screen. Sorry to disturb you. Good evening, Captain Sheridan. I smile. No problem. I'm sure you had a good reason, so I am all ears. Yes. Tell me, would it be convenient if I came to your cabin, say in half an hour? I would like to discuss a delicate matter. Even so? You intrigue me, Captain. Come. I'll be waiting impatiently. Thank you. The man gave an awkward, slightly twitching but definitely polite bow and hung up. As promised, John Sheridan arrived 25 minutes later. It was clear that, although he could consider himself a brave man, especially since he was a military man and had successfully gone through the war, he was uneasy about the upcoming conversation with a representative of an alien civilization that is thousands of years ahead of humanity and came from the depths of space. Although the captain held up quite well. Welcome, Captain Sheridan. I greet the man opposite the door hospitably, smiling broadly. I am glad to meet you. Thank you, Lord Baal. Thank you for agreeing to receive me even though it happened so unexpectedly.
It's nothing, Captain. I wave my hand, inviting the man to sit on the sofa. I'm sure you wouldn't bother me or any of the ambassadors without a serious reason. How can I help you? You see, Sheridan sat down on the sofa, looking around my cabin with interest, collecting his thoughts at the same time.
As far as I understand, you were absent from the station for some time on business, but some time ago, even before my arrival, there was an incident at the station. As a result, Michael Garibaldi, the head of our security service, was wounded. My attaché informed me when I returned that there had been some, as she put it, a small crisis. I thoughtfully stroked my beard, quietly studying the captain. But honestly, I didn't know that anyone from the crew had been seriously hurt. Is Mr. Garibaldi all right? To tell the truth, no, the captain sighed. An hour ago, I had a conversation with the head doctor. Dr. Franklin said that everything is very, very serious. Garibaldi is in a coma, although the medical workers did and continue to do everything they can to save him. I suppose these efforts are not enough, and that is why you decided to ask me for help. I agree, Captain Sheridan. I won't promise anything, but if I at least visit Mr. Garibaldi, no harm will come of it. Thank you, Lord Baal. The man exhaled in surprise. But, are you surprised? I smile in response to Sheridan's slightly twitching nod. Captain, you and I live in a huge, empty, and inhospitable universe. It would be even more uncomfortable if everyone measured each other's services only by personal gain, don't you think? I thought you might be unhappy with the fact that Dr. Franklin told me about your involvement in the fate of that dying boy. Mr. Franklin, I smile, is a very responsible and honest person. Because in the time that has passed since that incident, a long line of terminally ill patients has not yet formed at the door of my cabin. But I would be very surprised if he did not remember that incident at all, especially at a time when all other methods had already failed. Yes, you are right. He honestly told me about his promise and even offered an alternative treatment option, but I still insisted on contacting you. Really? Well, I slowly get up from my chair. I think there's no need to drag it out. Let's go to Mr. Garibaldi, and then we'll see if I can help with anything. I would be very grateful to you, Lord Baal. In the captain's voice and eyes, it was clear that, although he had only been in office for a few days, he already considered the crew his own, and one must fight for one's own. Your concern for your subordinates does you credit, Captain. I invite the man to follow me, going out into the corridor and heading towards the elevators. Such intelligent beings exist in all the cultures I know, but in each there are very, very few of them. The journey to the medical bay was silent. The captain still felt a little uneasy around me, and I simply wasn't in a hurry to get into his soul. However, a man like Sheridan should have quickly become one of the station's own, having become accustomed to both the crew and the diplomats. Whatever he thought of himself, his mentality, and the superficial thoughts during his conversation with Franklin, read by Behemoth, showed the right combination of inner qualities that suited his role perfectly. Tell me, Captain, I thoughtfully turned my head towards the man, what do you think about your new ship? A ship? What? Sheridan asked in surprise, shaking himself and returning from the depths of his thoughts about pressing problems. A ship, I nod. Galvados, I think. Yes? I won't be wrong if I assume that your engineers have finally figured out the schemes and solutions given to them, will I? As for me, it still doesn't reach the concept of ideal, but it already looks much better than your regular ships. Calvados is a prototype of a new frigate as far as I understand. It was indeed developed using your artificial gravity technologies. The captain shrugged. So far, I haven't had the opportunity to test it in combat, fortunately, but everything I've seen simply amazes me. I'm glad you liked it. I nod with a serious look. I also got aesthetic pleasure from the fact that you arrived on this frigate. Tell me, Lord Baal, Sheridan asked now, why? I mean, why did you give the Earth Commonwealth this technology? We tried to buy it from Minbar, but after the war, they didn't even want to consider our request, and the other races that have it simply refused, considering it something especially important, I suppose. I can understand their logic. Artificial gravity technology, in addition to obvious convenience, provides one important bonus that radically changes the behavior of civilization. I move my fingers in the air, this time speaking with a serious expression on my face. Artificial gravity allows ships to be made compact,
I think you have already noticed that even your prototype, made in the dimensions of a practically standard frigate, significantly surpasses this class of ships in its real characteristics. But where are you from? Experience, Captain. I wave it off. Simple experience. So here it is. Technology allows us to make ships smaller and therefore cheaper in terms of resource costs. It is unlikely that your neighbors would voluntarily agree to increase the size of your fleet in such an indirect way. I haven't looked at the question from that point of view, John admitted, thinking. But then why aren't you afraid of it? I think you can answer your own question, Captain Sheridan. I shake my head. Although the answer will sound a little arrogant, the man raised his eyebrows in surprise, trying to understand what I meant.
The level of development, Captain. Your technologies, forgive me, are generally so far behind ours that the presence or absence of artificial gravity does not change anything. There was a brief silence as the captain tried to comprehend and accept what he had heard. However, after a few seconds, the corridor led us to the entrance to the medical bay, which meant that the conversation could be continued another time. The infirmary was empty. Only in one of the separate boxes the light was on, and the silhouette of Franklin flickered, clearly preparing the patient for the upcoming manipulations. "Hello, Dr. Franklin." I watched with a smile as the medic flinched as soon as I pulled back the white curtain that hid what was happening from the observers on the side. "Ah, Lord Baal? I'm sorry, I didn't think that. Why not?" I tilt my head to the side. "I see no reason not to help Mr. Garibaldi, if it is, of course, within my power."
But I was positively pleasantly surprised by the fact that you tried to solve the problem yourself until the last moment. It does you credit, Doctor.
"Thank you. I would have continued to do so," the man sighed, pointing to the strangely shaped device standing on the table next to the bed. But the captain insisted on talking to you first, and only then using this. An interesting example of alien technology. I nod, looking closely at the device, but since I'm already here. I come closer to Garibaldi's bed, reading data on his condition from the medical bay computer. The nanites in my hand create elements of a medical scanner, so I had the opportunity to get more detailed and high-quality information by simply running my palm along the man's body. Well, and pathos, of course. Where would we be without it?
The wound from the phased plasma weapon itself was not particularly dangerous despite the high temperature and energy transferred. The shot, except for hits in certain parts of the body and especially unfortunate cases, did not cause critical damage. In addition, in Garibaldi's case, the shot hit almost the middle of the back, and the ribs and spine took the blow, preventing damage to the internal organs. But with all this, considering the general health of the security service chief, even after complex treatment, he was in no hurry to come out of the coma. Perhaps one handheld device alone will not do here. I have two pieces of news for you. I turn to Sheridan and Franklin, who are tensely awaiting the verdict. Both are not bad, but in his current state, Mr. Garibaldi will most likely not come out of his coma on his own. Can you help him somehow? I understand that you are not a doctor, but that boy... Franklin frowned.
"You're right, I'm not a doctor, I nod. But here, in my opinion, the situation is quite obvious. Unfortunately, I won't be able to cure him the same way as that boy. The problem is too complex. And that method works with... I move my fingers in the air, choosing the words. More local problems, let's say. Then how can we help him? My ship has the necessary equipment, I shrug. But he can't be moved, Stephen shook his head. He's stable now, but I can't guarantee that his condition won't get worse if we drag him to the dock. Dr. Franklin, I sigh, shaking my head. This is not a problem that could not be avoided. In any case, it is up to you to decide right here. I will not be able to help him. The men exchanged tense glances. But it seemed that concern for the security chief's condition still outweighed it. The Replicators' probability calculations gave 87.679% in favor of Sheridan's positive decision and 98.67% for Franklin.
It seemed that the captain felt out of place immediately after taking office, going to bow to the ambassador of an alien empire, having failed to solve the problem on his own. Given the overall probability, the replicators on the ship had already begun changing the configuration and creating a classic healing sarcophagus, so beloved by the Goa'uld system lords. "Will your treatment help him?" Sheridan asked, frowning and pressing his lips together. "If I wasn't able to help, I wouldn't even talk about it." I shake my head. The man looked at me silently for a while, as if trying to read my thoughts.
and I literally saw on his face how the gears were moving, weighing all the pros and cons in an attempt to make the right decision. The beginning of his service in the new position was rather crumpled, and this did not add to the captain's optimism and peace of mind. Okay, Sheridan finally decided. If you're sure you can help, and it won't make Mr.
Garibaldi's condition worse. I agree. I'll go with him, Franklin said quickly. I would be very surprised if you said otherwise. I look at the medic with a smile, slightly tilting my head to the side. The next moment, a wide and bright beam of light hit the ceiling of the medical bay, accompanied by a quiet grinding sound, causing Sheridan to involuntarily close his eyes in surprise. A second later, having covered the bed with the lying patient, Dr. Franklin and me, the beam disappeared, leaving a dumbfounded Sheridan blinking in the middle of an empty room. Interlude. Dr. Franklin blinked in surprise, looking around. He was no longer in the sickbay of Babylon 5. In fact, Stephen wasn't even sure he was still on the station.
The room that appeared before the doctor's eyes was stunning. A high vaulted ceiling supported by massive columns, a floor smoothed to a mirror shine, covered with some kind of dark material, vaguely familiar symbols on the walls and columns, and gold. Almost everything around looked like it was made of solid gold, and in the center of all this splendor, as if everything else were not enough, on a small elevation stood an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus. Franklin closed his eyes, barely refraining from rubbing them, but the picture before him did not change. Yes, the object in front of him was clearly made of other materials, had many differences from what he had seen in the surviving collections of museums on Earth. But it was definitely a sarcophagus, and everything around... The man looked around again, examining the decoration of the hall more closely, and with great surprise he realized that everything around him, all the interior details, decorations, symbols on the walls, was incredibly similar to ancient Egypt, as if the builders of the pyramids were highly developed guests from outer space. Other materials, incredible precision of lines, impossible with manual processing, slightly different looking hieroglyphs and images, but these were definitely examples of what historians called the culture of ancient Egypt. Lord Baal? Franklin finally turned slightly twitchingly towards the Goa'uld ambassador standing nearby with an interested smile. This is an Egyptian sarcophagus? And everything around, the symbols, the architecture, why does everything look Egyptian? As I once told Commander Sinclair, Baal's smile grew wider. This question is as interesting as the debate about what came first, the chicken or the egg that gave birth to it. Although it has a very, very simple answer. One only has to think about the age of your civilization on the scale of the universe. But Stephen's eyes widened in disbelief, voicing the only obvious conclusion. You were on Earth in ancient times. You have no idea, Doctor. Baal leaned towards the man, confidentially answering in his ear, how your cargo cults sometimes confuse me. The imagination and inventiveness of your kind is your strong point, but sometimes you overdo it. However, the Goa'uld ambassador straightened up, smiling again. I think we should pay attention to Mr. Garibaldi. After all, it was for him that we ended up here, don't you think so? Oh yeah, he survived the move without any consequences? Franklin's patient was found right there nearby.
Baal transferred Garibaldi right along with the medical bed and the status terminal connected to it, which was now signaling a loss of connection with the station's computer, but continued to regularly report the stable, unconscious state of the ward connected to it. With a quiet stone rustle, the lid of the sarcophagus split into two petals that moved apart, revealing a completely empty cavity inside. Now it became completely clear that this object could be anything but a simple stone coffin used by the Egyptians for burials. It was quite obvious that this was a complex, high-tech device, the principles of which, however, Franklin could not even imagine. The interior of the sarcophagus was completely empty, except for a light misty haze that filled it almost level with the upper edge. As soon as the lid was completely opened, a bluish beam struck from the ceiling, strikingly reminiscent of the Minbari traction gravity grips, and enveloped Garibaldi, who was lying on the bed.
Michael rose into the air completely silently, remaining completely motionless inside the area of space outlined by the light and being smoothly transferred inside the open sarcophagus. If my predictions are correct, Baal said calmly, watching with a bored expression as the body was transferred and the lid of the sarcophagus closed again, cutting off its contents from the surrounding space. Mr. Garibaldi should wake up in 10 minutes and 14 seconds. Wake up completely healthy, although I suspect he will be quite hungry, considering the time spent in a coma. In the meantime, the Goa'uld ambassador narrowed his eyes, looking at Franklin. "Doctor, I think we should discuss some issues regarding the promise you made about non-disclosure." The medic sighed tensely, involuntarily taking a step back. He didn't want to open his eyes at all. Garibaldi felt so good, comfortable, and calm, as he hadn't felt for many years.
Constant vigilance at work, readiness for trouble from any source, a pernicious addiction to alcohol, miraculously defeated several years ago. All this usually did not add to the man's cheerfulness and well-being. But now everything was completely different. Michael felt completely healthy, as if he had never drunk anything stronger than kefir, and started every morning with exercises. And this confused him. The last clear memory from the past was the assassination attempt on President Santiago and his attempts to prevent the tragedy. And the shot. Garibaldi remembered tracking down the suspected attackers, remembered tracking them down, and then someone shot him in the back with a plasma pistol. And then only darkness. But, as one extremely smart man said, he thought, and therefore he existed. Was he cured? Was the wound not as dangerous as it might have seemed? Suddenly, the surroundings changed, causing Garibaldi to open his eyes and stare in shock at the slab emitting a faint white glow right in front of his face. He was lying in some kind of stone coffin, the lid of which slowly began to move apart, separating into two parts.
Rise and shine, Mr. Garibaldi.
A soft and migraine-familiar voice came from somewhere outside.
Rise and shine! No, I don't mean to say that you're sleeping on the job.
Even without seeing Ambassador Baal, the head of security could say with complete certainty that the Goa'uld ambassador was smiling broadly, smiling the smile of a completely satisfied person. Intelligent.
No one deserves rest more than you, but I think we can simply say that your hour has struck again. After all, the right person in the right place can change the world.
The lid of the sarcophagus came apart completely, allowing Garibaldi to see that he was in a strange and extremely pompous hall. The cost of the decoration alone seemed to rival the budget of Babylon 5 for a year. And next to him, indeed, stood Lord Baal, smiling like a cat that had eaten a jar of sour cream, looking straight at him.
So, wake up, Mr. Garibaldi. There is still a lot of work waiting for you.
Mr. Garibaldi? Franklin popped out of the box as soon as Michael sat down in the sarcophagus. How are you feeling? You shouldn't get up abruptly. You've been in a coma for more than…
Dr. Franklin.
Lord Baal sighed.
I already told you that Mr. Garibaldi is completely healthy, even healthier than he was before his forced sick leave. Now he should feel very hungry and slightly disoriented, but nothing more. Cough.
Yes, Doc. Garibaldi nodded with surprise on his face, feeling that the ambassador was absolutely right. Now he was ready to gobble up a piece of meat half the size of himself, and even polish it with some fatter dessert. But in all other respects, he was simply indecently fine. Lord Baal is absolutely right. I just feel great. Moreover, the man shook his head from side to side, moved his shoulders. Damn it. Before all this mess, I pulled my back during training. And now I feel that I don't feel anything. My back doesn't hurt. Franklin pulled a portable medical scanner out of his pocket and, still somewhat skeptical, began to wave it in front of his patient's chest. And with each passing second, he understood less and less. Michael really was completely, utterly, absolutely healthy. There was not even a trace of the fracture on his arm he had suffered several years ago, which was simply impossible from the point of view of earthly medicine and his personal experience. But there it was, right in front of him. Lord Baal, the medic said in shock, but how could this even be possible? I could hardly believe what happened to the boy. And I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes and conducted a comparative examination. But this?
This is exactly the case, Dr. Franklin, Baal sighed, that we discussed some time ago when you tried to save the alien sitting on the planet below us. The ambassador simply and uncomplicatedly pointed his finger at the floor. The technologies available to me can heal almost anything, even bring someone back to life if death has not occurred too long ago. The only question is the cost of such treatment. But, Franklin recalled the conversation in question and shuddered. You said then that the price for such a cure could be madness. What? Madness? Garibaldi, who had been listening attentively, shuddered. Not in this case, gentlemen. The ambassador shook his head. Mr.
Garibaldi is still quite young, unlike your previous patient. Besides, such consequences do not occur immediately. Now, if he underwent such sessions on a regular basis,
Baal moved his fingers in front of him,
say, once a month,
with the aim of prolonging his life and gaining quasi-immortality.
then it would be a different matter. But nothing will happen from one time.
The ambassador looked at Garibaldi with malice.
You do not experience an irresistible aggression and desire to gain world domination, Mr. Garibaldi? No, I think so. Well, then there is no problem. And now, Mr. Garibaldi, you can climb out of the sarcophagus. I know that it is quite comfortable despite the rigidity of the structure, but you no longer require healing. And you, Doctor?
Baal looked at Franklin with a squint.
Do not forget about our agreement. Be so kind. Yes.
Stephen nodded twice, helping the bewildered Garibaldi get out of the device and stand up on his feet.
Excellent. Then it's time for us to go back. Baal raised an eyebrow, and the next moment, a screeching beam of light enveloped everyone present, carrying them back to the station's medical bay, to a visibly nervous Sheridan who had been waiting for the results all this time. Chapter 26. Time to gather stones. Or not. You have no idea what hidden possibilities it has, and he has no idea. Gandalf the Grey, The Hobbit, Interlude. Dr. Franklin, Lord Baal. Sheridan turned at the flash of light. Was everything successful? More than that, Captain, the medic nodded, stepping aside and giving John a view of Garibaldi, who was blinking in surprise. Of course, I'll still conduct a thorough examination of Mr. Garibaldi, but based on the results of the initial examination, he is completely healthy. Doc, or maybe we shouldn't?
He asked the security chief plaintively, taking a step back. The prospect of undergoing a thorough examination at Franklin's hands clearly didn't appeal to him too much. We must, Mr. Garibaldi, we must, Franklin answered sternly. Mr. Garibaldi, the captain joined the conversation. You spent a long time in a coma and came out of it only by an incredible miracle. You somewhat overestimate my modest participation, Captain Sheridan. Baal, who had been listening silently all this time, chuckled. But my advice to you, Mr. Garibaldi, it's cheaper to agree. Knowing Dr. Franklin, he won't leave you alone. Easy for you to say, Michael grumbled. In any case, I will take my leave. Baal actually gave a short bow to everyone present. I have some matters that require my attention. The ambassador glanced at the man, turned, and walked quickly out of the medical bay.
For a few seconds, the room was silent, interrupted only by the measured beeping of the medical computer, which Baal had returned along with the men, which had once again found a connection with the station's computer and was now signaling the disappearance of the patient under his control. Can someone explain to me what the hell just happened? Garibaldi finally spoke up, looking with some suspicion at Sheridan, who was still unfamiliar to him. It was a small miracle, Franklin said with a sigh, that you are alive again, Mr. Garibaldi, and not pretending to be a decorative object. The head of security frowned, stopping short. It was clear from the man's face that he had not yet fully realized everything that had happened to him. The new, vivid impressions of awakening had overshadowed past events and memories, which were not particularly clear due to his recent state.
But after a few seconds, awareness flashed in Garibaldi's eyes, which was then replaced by horror. President? Have they been stopped? Are they going to kill the president? Unfortunately, Sheridan shook his head with a sigh. The president died. Earth wrote it off as an accident. Damn it! And who are you? I don't know you. Only now did Garibaldi realize that he had missed much more than he had previously thought. In front of him stood an unfamiliar officer with the rank of captain, whom he had never seen at the station before, although your face seems vaguely familiar to me. Captain John Sheridan, the station commander introduced himself. Your new commander. Commander Sinclair was transferred to another duty station, so... The man spread his hands. I hope we can work together. Damn it! Michael rolled his eyes, looking from Franklin to Sheridan and back. It was worth switching off for a couple of days and everything turns upside down.
Not to reproach you, Captain. It's just all too sudden.
I understand you perfectly, Mr. Garibaldi. Sheridan nodded with a smile. My appointment here also came as a bolt from the blue in July, but we have what we have. I have to... Tell me better. The captain asked the most burning question. Do you remember anything? Who shot at you? Of course The man began but stopped short, as if he had run into a wall. I'll try. Garibaldi frowned, feverishly trying to recall the last moments before he was wounded. Here he burst into the compartment occupied by the suspects. There are 3 of them. Or more? No, he saw 3 men in front of him. They were completely unafraid and unfazed, even when Michael pulled out a gun and pointed it at them. They were completely sure that they were in no danger. And then, a flash of searing pain, and he fell. There was someone else in the room, someone he hadn't noticed. Damn it. No, I don't remember.
Garibaldi shook his head in annoyance. They were shooting from behind. There was someone else in that compartment. Someone I didn't see. Or I saw, but I can't remember. I don't know. Don't torture yourself. Sheridan nodded, although he couldn't call himself pleased with the man's answer. Even though you've recovered, thanks to technology and Lord Baal's invaluable help, being wounded is always a huge stress. Maybe later you'll be able to recall something else, something that's not obvious now. Yes, Captain. The man nodded. I'll try. You will try, but only after the examination. Franklin was not going to let his patient go so easily, even after a miraculous cure. Captain, as the chief physician of Babylon 5, I recommend Mr. Garibaldi a complete examination of the body. And then, depending on the results, several days of complete rest. No worries, and not even thoughts about work. Doc! I've been a doc for years, Franklin mimicked Garibaldi. But I'll stick to my decision. I don't mind, Doctor, Sheridan nodded. Mr. Garibaldi, you really should take a couple of days off, and I'll make sure that Babylon 5 isn't in pieces when you return to duty. Garibaldi could only sigh, dejectedly, resigning himself to fighting against both the doctor and the station commander, although he did feel healthier than he had since his youth. I wonder if Lord Baal was exaggerating when he spoke of mental disorders caused by frequent use of the sarcophagus. He wouldn't mind occasionally sleeping in one instead of his own bed. Well, it's okay once in a while, right? Right? On the way to the embassy cabin, I was simultaneously peeping at what exactly the cat was doing. With all my confidence in the Replicators' capabilities in terms of gene engineering, I still doubted that Behemoth, in terms of personal power, was much higher than P12 according to human classification. P12 was a very, very high level. The same Bester is an excellent example of this. Besides, only 12-level telepaths were accepted into the ranks of Psychops in the Earth Commonwealth, responsible for detecting and capturing fugitive human telepaths, and that said something. But in any case, Behemoth was the first artificially grown telepath, created on the basis of a hodgepodge of genetic data, obtained from representatives of all the younger races represented on the station. Yes, the replicators cleared the samples of everything unnecessary, isolating a pure telepathic gene, and the technology of genetic engineering allowed manipulating DNA and could bring this very gene to the ideal state, as it should have been from the point of view of the Vorlons, who were initially concerned with its investment in developing civilizations. But it was still a bare theory. Despite all the technical possibilities, I still did not have a complete
an unambiguous understanding of how exactly telepathy works and what it is. Even despite all the research, experiments and observations of the work of the same telepathy in Alice, plus even the ideal spherical telepathy in a vacuum, did not imply mastery in using the skill that brainpackers who devoted many years of practice and training to their craft could possess. Yes, Behemoth can still give the overwhelming majority of telepaths of the younger races a run for their money, but this was not an absolute superiority. For every strongman there will always be a small skinny Asian sensei who will break all his brute power on the knee of cunning and cunning feints. At least for now, everything was exactly like that. That is why Behemoth was instructed not to go near Kosh and to be careful about who and where he was going to read.
The ability to close one's consciousness from other people's influences, to hide from telepathic scanning, all this was tied to a greater extent to personal strength than to skill. At least in those cases when the telepath does not deliberately seek out his target, carefully scanning the space around. So at the moment the cat was doing the very thing for which cats were best adapted by nature, wandering around the station and watching, listening, performing a superficial scan of all the intelligent beings that interested him. That's how I learned about Dr. Franklin's miracle device, capable of both curing a mortally wounded patient and killing a hopelessly healthy test subject, depending on the mode and power the operator uses it in. And this device, at least until it landed on my lab table, looked really curious. According to Stephen's fragmentary knowledge, gleaned from a conversation with his colleague, Dr.
Rosen, the alien device was originally intended to carry out a just execution by transferring the life energy of a criminal to his victim, or, if the victim was already dead, to someone else, thereby simultaneously performing retribution for sins and benefiting society as a whole. True, I had no idea what this life energy was and how it could be transferred from creature to creature, and the question was important. In this universe, there was at least one more creature capable of operating this very energy, transferring it from itself to other intelligent beings, thereby maintaining life even in the most unviable body. And if in the case of Lorien it was possible to write off all this to the heights of evolutionary development of the ideal and most ancient creature in the universe, then here, a device the size of a typewriter of the 19th, 20th centuries, created by unknown aliens, I want it. By the way, speaking of alien devices, I still wanted to study the triluminary.
It was not clear who created it was not clear when, and it was not clear why. 3 of them, as far as I knew, were in the possession of the Minbari, playing an important and, as it were, key role in their religious social rituals. It seems that there was some murky story about them, that Valen had given them to me in ancient times, but where he got them himself was definitely unclear. At one time, I blamed the great machine on the planet below, but the Replicators did not find any sensible mentions of similar devices in the databanks. Or rather, how there were mentions, but even in such an ancient device, they were limited to a description and recording the fact of their presence, those same 3 pieces, in the warehouse. There was not even a record of the date of their appearance, let alone the creators.
The triluminary was a small artifact in the form of a triangle, folded from fixed silver wire, in the center of which, on thinner threads, something was suspended that most resembled a broken element of some kind of microcircuit, or a crystal. The Minbari themselves approached the artifact with unfailing reverence, not even trying to study or understand the device that fell into their hands. All 3 triangles were under the jurisdiction of the Grey Council, issued as needed to selected representatives of the race, but remaining under the strictest control and supervision. Moreover, even in the information space of the Minbari themselves, there was not much information about the triluminaries. It was known that the device could influence memory, closing or unlocking certain parts of memories, immerse a sentient being in a kind of paralysis, leaving their consciousness unaffected, and what was not entirely clear to me, but aroused additional interest,
determine a part of Valen's soul in sentient beings. Moreover, these operating modes were simply postulated as a given, and no one even tried to somehow figure out how exactly the artifact does all this and what else it can do. If it can. In any case, based on the data the replicator units were receiving from the station's sensors, there was an 89.345% chance that the only people in Ambassador Delenn's cabin were herself and the cocoon in which she was undergoing the transformation process. At least, that was what the life support system data, showing the rate of increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the air said. One of the inconspicuous service panels, behind which the cabin's utility lines were usually hidden and access to their controls was located, moved aside with a quiet rustle and, from the opening, with a light clatter of limbs, several juniors descended. The Minbari ambassador's cabin was a typical space of the station's embassy level, as always furnished in the style usual for a representative of the species occupying it. Everything was spoiled only by a clearly alien organic cocoon, the height of a kneeling person, attached to one of the corners of the room. Well, the cocoon was still intact, which meant that it was too early for Delenn to hatch. Although, as far as I remembered the chronology of events, this should have happened any day now. This was another riddle. The replicators were quite good at genetic engineering, but even with their knowledge, the essence of the transformation that the Minbari voluntarily went through eluded me. Same triluminary, usually used as a symbol of power, of the head of the Great Council. A religious symbol and an artifact turned out to be capable of also carrying out complex genetic manipulations inside a formed organism without disrupting its functioning and viability. And in this case, who can guarantee that the functions I know are the only ones embedded in it? Having made sure once again that there were no unwanted witnesses, I directed one spider to the cocoon, carefully, almost tenderly, pinching off a small fragment of the material that made it up, which was immediately picked up by the teleportation module and sent to the ship that was still near the station. A sample of the lens tissue could be taken later, when the transformation was complete. Now the triluminary, I don't think Lanier carries the device with him. After all, in some places on the station, you can lose the contents of your pockets faster than you can sneeze in a dusty room.
Therefore, the other 3 juniors received the command for a thorough search, and I continued to track the movements of intelligent beings in the nearby corridors of the embassy sector. The Asgard teleportation device was a marvelous technology, wonderful in its multitasking, even if its creators themselves used only a fraction of its full potential. And I'm not even mentioning the fact that the teleporter alone was a monstrous weapon in its destructive potential. Teleport a squad of saboteurs aboard an enemy ship? Easy. And a powerful bomb a second before it explodes? Pfft. And what about the ability to simply, and without fuss, teleport the entire crew of an enemy ship out into space nearby? Or pull out the bolts and rivets holding the hull together, remove armor plates, take away ammunition?
Yes, all of the above was, of course, an ideal case in a real combat clash, when both ships were covered by force fields. When electronic warfare systems were in operation, the task of using teleportation in combat was no longer so trivial. It was too sensitive to external influences and interference. But this technology had another very, very useful feature, the ability to atomically construct an object according to a predetermined scheme, which, the scheme, could be easily obtained using careful scanning. Scanning that the teleporter carried out each time at the initial moment of transferring the object. Having searched the entire cabin, the spider-like replicators found the required object, a small triangular structure with a piece of an unknown mineral placed in the center, so far unknown. The triluminar was in a small carved box standing on a table near the sofa, carefully and meticulously wrapped in a piece of silky, embroidered fabric.
It immediately became clear that the artifact was treated with unfailing respect and veneration, that it was an important object of a metaphysical cult. A thin beam of light struck from the cabin ceiling, penetrating the lid of the box and the fabric with the same ease as through all the bulkheads of Babylon 5 and the emptiness of space. There was a great temptation to take the artifact for real. Leaving a copy of it, as far as I remembered, it would remain unclaimed for quite a long time, but without an exact idea of the principles of its operation and all the functions embedded, this would be an imprudent act. Therefore, for now we will limit ourselves to scanning and copying the structure. The younger ones could not, like me, form such a complex device as a multi-range scanner, but in combination with the teleportation module, even their simplest scanning capabilities were sufficient. Interlude. Natoth, already habitually holding back the irritation seething inside, walked quickly along the corridor towards the embassy cabin. Many days had passed since Shakar left on important business, as he himself put it, but there was no news or messages from the ambassador. It was not that the attaché was worried about her boss. He was an adult and capable of standing up for himself, but in his prolonged absence, it was she who had to perform all the duties and sort out the continuing to accumulate cases. And this incredibly angered the Narn, who was not known for her meekness. With a familiar movement inserting the keycard into the lock, the girl entered the cabin, continuing to read one of the reports on food purchases for remote colonies. Although she hated all this bureaucratic red tape, Natoth could not deny that this was an important and necessary matter. Close the door. Ambassador Shakar's quiet and clearly tired voice came from somewhere in the depths of the room.
The ambassador's voice made the attaché flinch, only miraculously leaving this fact unnoticed. With a smooth movement of her hand pressing the door-closing sensor, Natoth slowly moved deeper into the cabin. It didn't seem to her that the ambassador was sitting on his bed, clearly exhausted from the long flight and clearly pale, which was noticeable even in the red light of the lamps. "Weep for the future, Natoth," the man said quietly, looking up from the open book of Gakwan before him. "Weep for us all. Are you well, Ambassador?" I looked into the darkness, Natoth. The Non shook his head. "And after that, you can't remain the same. As soon as I heard about the destruction of our base in Square 37, I realized that such a brazen attack, such a large-scale action, could only be carried out by a powerful state. And that means there are only two options: an ancient race," the man sighed, "or a new race. Do you think this is a provocation by the Goa'uld Empire?"
Natoth perked up. There were rumors that they... "No, Natoth." The man shook his head again. "Lord Baal has nothing to do with the attack. Of course, I'll talk to him to dispel even the slightest doubt, but... no. I don't think this is his doing." "But who then?" Gakwan spoke of a great war in ancient times. Shakar stroked the pages of the book with his fingers. Of a terrible enemy devouring the stars themselves. He admitted that such an enemy could not be defeated completely. Repulsed, defeated, yes, but not destroyed. He believed that this enemy lurked somewhere on the outskirts of the galaxy. For many days I searched, rushed from system to system in the hope of finding at least the slightest trace, the slightest clue to the solution. And then...
Shakar spoke as if to himself. The Nan absent-mindedly shifted his gaze from the pages of the book to his attaché and back, but the girl did not feel that he was looking at her. Rather, through her, his thoughts still there, in the depths of space, in distant star systems. "I have discovered, Natoth, that on the dead abandoned planets where there should not be a trace of life for 1,000 years, something is happening, awakening, secretly gathering strength without attracting attention, hiding." The ambassador raised his gaze, looking straight into the girl's eyes, from prying eyes. "We must warn everyone in 1,000 years. The darkness is coming again." "Ambassador," Natoth could only shake her head, "you yourself understand how incredible this sounds, even for me who has known you for many years. What can we say about ambassadors of other races? And the Centauri ambassador? You are going to lend a helping hand to this... He will laugh in your face."
"I can't just remain silent, Natoth," the Narn shook his head. "I understand your attitude. I myself would gladly consider all this a fairy tale, or a tragic coincidence. Mourn those who died at that base and move on with my life. But I can't. I don't have the right to do this." Shakar carefully closed the book of Gakwan, placing the sacred text on the nightstand, and sighed as he swung his legs off the bed. He knew in his mind that without proof, without real proof to point to, even members of his own government would not believe him, let alone the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, the Earth Commonwealth, or Minbar. He honestly didn't want to even think about Londo. His conscience wouldn't allow him to leave even such a neighbor without warning. But he knew perfectly well what the scandalous ambassador's reaction to his words would be.
I asked the new commander of Babylon 5 to call an emergency meeting of the Advisory Council. The Narn sighed. "I hope that at least Delenn will listen to my concerns. She has always been a very responsible woman."
It won't be as easy as you think, Ambassador. In terms of Ambassador Delenn, right after you left, Ambassador, something happened to her. She's alive. As far as I know, yes. At least, there have been no official statements from Minbar, but she hasn't appeared in public for a long time. And Lanier, with tedious consistency, replies that she can't accept visitors and that they should come later. How untimely. Jakar slapped his hands on his knees in frustration. Okay, I get it. So first I'll go to Lord Baal.
The first days after taking command were filled with endless bureaucratic red tape for Sheridan. Taking over the affairs there, reading the reports here, signing a bunch of documents that required the signature of the station's senior officer and had accumulated during the powerlessness on Babylon. No, the situation was familiar to the man. Practically the same thing was repeated and would be repeated every time one of the officers was transferred from one duty station to another, differing only in volume and depending on the rank held.
But he had no idea how much bureaucracy there could be on a simple and straightforward diplomatic station in a neutral area of space. And only after he began to carefully and thoroughly study all the documents he had inherited from his predecessor, including the internal regulations of Babylon 5, and a huge pile of instructions and regulations on interaction with ambassadors and other diplomatic representatives of alien races, John clearly understood once again what a big-caliber pig his native command had played on him by sending him to the station on a prototype frigate, handing the latter over to his command. "Captain Sheridan, may I come in?" "Yes, Lieutenant Prendick." Sheridan rubbed his eyes tiredly, putting aside another document and turning towards the first mate of the Calvados, who entered his office. "Come in. How are things on the Calvados? How is the crew? Any comments or suggestions?"
Thank you for your concern, Captain. Edward nodded, but at the moment everything is normal. Babylon 5's supply services have provided us with everything we need. If you allow me, the man smiled, I certainly like dealing not with one of the fleet bases, but with a civilian, practically civilian station. Where else could I count on normal coffee and fresh pastries? Not much. But the crew already understands everything that we have. It's a great bonus to morale. Glad to hear it, Lieutenant. Sheridan smiled. I myself spent almost all my free time on the first day in the park area. Nevertheless, I called you for advice. Consult? Prendick raised his eyebrows in surprise. Exactly. I think you yourself have already thought about the certain, delicacy of the fact that our frigate is near the station. Having waited until Prendick nodded in agreement, the captain continued. Despite all the conventions and statements, the Calvados was and remains a military ship belonging to the military fleet of the Earth Commonwealth. And this, Sheridan waved his hand around the room, is a diplomatic station de jour being neutral territory, and the military ship, located in the same system, the senior assistant continued, will be perceived by all parties as an instrument of political pressure. Even if such a situation never actually arises, the ambassadors will think about this first and foremost. You understand it yourself, the captain sighed. What will be the orders? I will ask the command for clarification. Sheridan rubbed the bridge of his nose with his fingers. But it will take some time, and complaints from diplomats may start pouring in tomorrow. Therefore, in the current situation, I see only one reasonable solution. Since I myself cannot leave the post of commander of Babylon 5, you, as my senior assistant, will have to take command of the frigate for a while. Judging by the reports accumulated by my predecessor, the captain tapped his finger on the tablet lying on the table, the Babylon sector is quite calm. But in the neighborhood, from the ships of almost all representatives of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, information came about several pirate gangs waiting for flying ships 1 or 2 transitions from the station. When they dig in completely, Babylon dispatches its fighters to escort on the approaches to a station. But this is not the case. After all, they are part of the defensive systems and not a patrol fleet. I think I understand you, Prendick nodded thoughtfully. You suggest that the Calvados, take a walk around the station and try, if not to track down the pirate bases, then at least to serve as a scarecrow for them.
Something like that.
As far as I understood from the ship's characteristics, our frigate is quite suitable for long-term autonomous missions, away from supply bases. In addition, we have a shortage of crew, which means the ship's resource will be spent even more slowly. Thus, you will be able to watch for pirates in hyperspace near the transition zones, turning out to be a complete surprise for them. Babylon in turn will supply you with operational information about the appearance of the enemy, or signals for help from passing ships.
We'll manage, Captain. The first mate nodded, still somewhat thoughtful, but quite firmly. How much time do we have to prepare? If there are no objections, the orders are ready. Sheridan punched out a sequence of commands on the terminal keyboard and handed the man several standard transparent forms with orders from himself as the station commander and captain of the Calvados. You can contact the Babylon 5 supply service. The relevant orders are in the documents.
You will be provided with provisions and everything you need. As soon as I receive clarification from command, I will notify you and the crew of further orders.
No objections, Captain.
In that case, you can go, Lieutenant.
Prendick nodded briefly and left the office, and John leaned back in his chair, exhaling. One problem, at least for a while, became less. Yes, sending a basically green crew on a combat mission without the direct command of an experienced officer did not please him in the word absolutely, but pirates were just pirates, and only one or two of their gangs could boast of surprisingly good equipment, and even then only in comparison with the rest of the rabble. So this order, among other things, was an excellent way to give the crew of the new frigate the opportunity to test the ship in conditions close to combat, without immediately getting involved in a large and dangerous skirmish with someone more serious.
Well, Sheridan, as he had told Prendick, turned to the terminal and began writing a report to his immediate naval superiors with a full and detailed description of the situation on the station and his concerns regarding the presence of a military ship in a neutral area of space. And then all that was left was to sit and wait for the command's response, hoping that the ship's departure from the zone of visibility of the ambassadors and diplomats would allow them to avoid their discontent and official notes of protest addressed to the Earth Commonwealth. Information about the structure of the Minbari artifact, as well as genetic information about the cocoon in which Delenn was safely sent via the replicator network to the laboratory complex on the opposite side of the galaxy. And
Some of the research could have been carried out on board the hot dock, where the original sample of the cocoon was sent. But my innate paranoia, no matter how much Corone thought otherwise, recommended that I firstly not put all my eggs in one basket, and secondly, conduct any questionable experiments at the maximum possible distance from worlds inhabited by species familiar to me. Yes, even a high-tech humanoid replicator, consisting of incredible nanomachines, sometimes needs a mental rest. Suddenly, I caught myself thinking that, in fact, the last time I did nothing was when I talked with Ambassador Malari in some restaurant in the recreational sector of the station. Well, I was not going to get drunk with a Centauri, but nothing prevented me from repeating the walk in more pleasant company.
Girls, I send a message to both necks via the replicator network. How would you like it if I took advantage of my status as an irrational tyrant and invited you to join me in one of the wonderful establishments of Babylon 5? There was a moment of silence, simply saturated with emotions of surprise, shock, and disbelief. It seemed that my proposal was so unexpected that even Corone, contrary to her eternal habit, could not find words to expose my illogical and strange behavior. Of course, I did not believe one iota that she could simply resign herself to it.
I'm not sure that...
Yuki began. You and your sister like the cakes, don't deny it. I know it for sure. And I suggest you go to a cafe and eat those same cakes. And who of us is illogical in this case?
Of course, you...
Corone sighed, and I literally felt how, in her personality matrix, there was a serious struggle between the desire to actually eat her favorite delicacy and the need to scold me for wasting my time.
But you still refuse to conduct a systemic diagnosis, so...
That's great! Then let's go! With a wide smile, I rise from my chair in my cabin, taking a step towards my attaché and sister, who are emerging from the adjacent room, putting my arm around the girl's shoulders, which caused Corone's ear to twitch in displeasure and Yuki's face to look puzzled. I lead them away from the cabin, heading slowly towards the elevator. It's not that I, a replicator, really needed rest, whether physical or moral, but something inside me thought otherwise, and on the other hand, it would be really sad to slide into naked machine logic, losing even a hint of humanity. Therefore, Lord Baal is going to have fun.
Although I understand that this is useless, I still want to draw your attention to the fact that the instructions you gave to Behemoth may cause undesirable consequences, Lillidan said, looking sideways at me.
Calculations show that the probability of encountering a telepath from one of the alien races who is able to break through his block is 32.258%, which will lead to unauthorized access to the resources of the replicator network. No organic brain can digest the amount of information that constantly circulates through the network, Yuki said. I am sure that the telepath created by Lord Baal will be able to detect an attempt to scan his own mind and redirect the channel from consciousness to the network directly. The local races are too used to the idea that only someone humanoid can be a telepath. I shake my head, smiling. The probability that Behemoth will be suspected of being at least an intelligent being, let alone a telepath, is 4.32%, which is practically a margin of error. Should I consider this a compliment? The cat, who was brazenly eavesdropping on the conversation, transmitted over the network.
Rather, it is a statement to the fact that I doubt the sanity of the locals. An interesting sentence. Behemoth gave an image similar to a shrug, and Behemoth returned to his business. In any case, with a satisfied expression on his face, he lightly scratched both girls behind the ears, causing them to shudder in surprise. We've already arrived. Make yourself at home and don't deny yourself anything. I motioned to the waiter, who, by the way, was already moving towards the table occupied by the necks. It seemed that they were very well known here because the man, having barely noticed my companions, changed his expression for a second, sighed heavily, and made a short gesture to someone in the direction of the kitchen. Welcome, he smiled. I suppose it's the usual? Yes, Corona nodded immediately. In double quantity. Of course. And you, Lord Baal? I'll have your wonderful baskets with cream and coffee, please. I smile, leaning back in my chair with a satisfied look.
Everything will happen in a second. While waiting for the order, the Nekis quietly talk to each other, having a normal girlish conversation. And judging by the emotions leaking into the network, this was no longer just performing a background task for the purpose of camouflage, but a completely conscious action. They both liked the conversation. The further, the more I began to be proud of the personal matrices compiled under my control and the direction of their development. At the same time, the cafe's visitors were already discussing our company. If Korone and Yuki had already become quite familiar here, they hadn't seen me here before, and were now discussing the ambassador's unexpected appearance in a very ordinary establishment where they would just drop in to eat a cake and drink a cup of something, depending on the time of day and their mood. And also, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed one of the visitors who was paying much closer attention to our company than everyone else. He was literally staring at the girls, not taking his eyes off them, as if unable to believe that they really existed. And he also secretly took a photo. Curious. Everyone and their dog knows about the presence of Nek at the station, and for quite some time. But the reaction was too noticeable. A spy? Someone's plant? Or just a lover of cat girls? We need to check. Smiling broadly, I placed my hand palm down on the table, commanding the nanites to form from myself and the tabletop material an imitation of a dense photograph, as if imprinted on the surface of a metal plate. The photo depicts Korone and Yuki, looking into the frame with sweet smiles, which makes the whole composition just beg to be added to some anime work of Earth. Yuki, noticing my manipulations, raised an eyebrow in surprise, twitching the tip of her right ear but remained silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Dear sir, I slowly get up from the table, slowly approaching the voyeur who looked at me with fear. What are you doing? You could have calmly come up and asked to take a photo. I completely agree with you that these lovely ladies are the most beautiful thing in this establishment. No offense to all the other representatives of the female sex. I bow to the hall, with a slight guilty smile addressed to several girls sitting at the neighboring tables. Here, take it. This angle will be much better. The man, still in a half-frightened, half-shocked state, automatically took the photograph handed to him, dumbfoundedly shifting his gaze between the image, the next continuing their conversation, and me, smiling broadly. Don't be shy, my friend. There's nothing wrong with loving the beautiful.
I approvingly pat him on the shoulder and returned to the girls sitting at our table, completely losing interest in my new acquaintance, and with visible pleasure accepting the ordered cup of coffee from the waiter's hands and taking the first sip of the delicious drink. Let's see what you do next. Chapter 27. Legends of Days Gone By. The myth that is believed gradually becomes the truth. George Orwell. We sat with our necks thoroughly, in no hurry at all, And no one bothered us after the curious paparazzi who left the establishment almost immediately after our short conversation with him. Having brought the ordered pastries and coffee, the waiter also quickly retreated somewhere towards the kitchen, taking a strategically correct position so as not to show off, but also, if necessary, quickly react to our desire to order something else. Lord Baal. The voice of the Narn ambassador came from the entrance to the hall in surprise. Ambassador Jakar. I smile broadly, raising my coffee cup in greeting, half rising from my chair. Please join us, unless of course you have other plans for the evening. Thank you, Lord Baal. Ilgar indeed carefully settled himself on the last free chair at our table. Have a good evening to you and your companions. The Narn bowed his head. I hope I have not disturbed your rest with my impudence. Don't worry, Ambassador. I glanced sideways at Corona, who at that very moment was putting another basket of cream into her mouth, and shake my head with a smile. When Corona and her sister are busy destroying sweets, nothing that won't try to take the delicacy away from them will stop them. Would you like to order something? A short gesture with my hand, and the prudent waiter with a small folder of menus was already heading our way. Herbal tea, nothing more. The Narn waved his hand at the waiter. Lord Baal, frankly speaking, I was looking for you. Yes?
And how can I help you, dear Ambassador Jakar?
Honestly, this is a rather delicate conversation. The man hesitated. I was hoping to find you in your cabin in the embassy sector, but I accidentally saw you sitting here through the window, so I came in. Ambassador, if you are embarrassed by the local public, we can reschedule the meeting for a later time. Just let me know when it is convenient for you. And now, I take a sip of coffee. We can just have a nice conversation over a cup of selected drinks about something abstract. No, Shakar sighed, accepting a large mug of steaming tea from the waiter. I don't think it makes that much sense anyway. I was going to raise practically the same issue at the next council meeting, and then the Narn waved his hand. No matter how formal this event is, rumors always somehow leak out. It's just, frankly, I'm not a great master of beautiful speeches. So I'm trying to choose my words so that I can say what I intend to and not offend the ambassador of another state. Suddenly, Jakar is deeply troubled by something. And does this something have something to do with me in particular, or the Goa'uld Empire in general? With a probability of 70.34%, came the comment from Corona. The Narn ambassador wishes to request your assistance in some state affairs, most likely in the matter of their confrontation with the Centauri Republic, or something concerning our secretive arachnid acquaintances. The probability of this outcome is 42.371%. There is such a thing called intuition. Corona expressed her usual displeasure at my irrationality, but this time she chose to remain silent, returning to her conversation with Yuki and the sweets. Indeed, as far as I could tell, at about this very time when Ambassador Delenn was about to complete her genetic transformation and emerge from her cocoon, Jakar was planning a reconnaissance flight into Zadum space in order to confirm, or dispel, his suspicions about the return of an ancient enemy. I will take your concerns into account, Ambassador. I lean back in my chair, stroking my beard with my fingers, showing with my whole appearance that I am ready to listen. I promise not to be offended by harsh formulations and not to look for non-existent insults in your words, at least today. Shakar blinked in surprise. Thank you, Lord Baal. What I wanted to ask, some time ago, there were persistent rumors circulating around the station. The Narn spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. Although they were not officially confirmed by anyone or anything, that your empire had some connection, still not entirely clear to me, to an incident on one of the Minbari colonies. Neither Ambassador Delenn nor any of the officials, of course, claimed this, but rumors are circulating. Yes. To paraphrase one reasonable person, I sigh. Babylon 5, unfortunately, is full of damn clairvoyance. There is nothing secret in this story, Ambassador. I shrug. I suppose the Minbari government is not eager to make public what happened, simply so as not to incur damage to their honor. They like that. Honor? Jakar frowned in surprise. You see, I put down my almost empty cup of coffee, leaning closer to the Narn to speak practically in his ear. It was a pure misunderstanding. Their colony suffered because of an ancient geological exploration module, long forgotten by our empire, which were once sent to different corners of the universe to collect samples and potentially extract resources on promising planets. I spread my hands with a guilty expression on my face. I had no idea that one of them was not only still functioning, but also ended up so far from the expected zone of space to which it was sent. I have already made an official apology to Ambassador Delenn for this tragic incident, but as far as I know, none of the Minbari on that colony suffered damage, only the buildings. Corone solved the problem, so… I confirm, nodded the Neka, reluctantly tearing herself away from her tea. The unfortunate misunderstanding on the Minbari colony Shlekta was resolved as soon as we became aware of the situation. The planet's population was not harmed. Oh. The Narn sipped his tea thoughtfully, digesting what he had heard.
Yes, I can understand our proud neighbors admitting that they lost an entire colony to… Jakar gave a nervous laugh.
Mining equipment. Well, I think I got the answer to my question without even asking it, but I still have to ask it directly. Of course, Ambassador. I nod. I'm all attention. Our base in Square 37 was destroyed by an unknown enemy. It simply, the man's side, stopped communicating. And when our ships arrived to find out what was going on, there was nothing left there. Just a field of debris, Lord Baal. No survivors, no escape pods, nothing. Even in a clash with the Centauri, it is impossible for the Narns not to have time to at least send out a distress signal. It was obvious that the ambassador had a hard time speaking openly. The Narn was clearly worried about his people, about their fate, and perceived the destroyed base as a personal failure in his position.
It was becoming obvious that at the beginning of the conversation he assumed and feared that I was somehow involved in what happened. But he still came and asked about it directly, and this added additional points to his reputation in my eyes. Although, of course, it must be problematic for an ambassador as straightforward as a cast iron crowbar to fulfill his duties against the background of his more flexible and cunning colleagues. However, Jakar still had time to develop and change. I understand your concern, I nod. And of course I will request information about this square of space from my government, simply to exclude all possible unforeseen accidents. But even so, I can tell you with confidence that the Goa'uld Empire has nothing to do with the destruction of your base. I spread my hands thoughtfully. As far as I can judge, we don't even have any interests in this area of space. Jakar relaxed for a moment, letting out a sigh of relief, but then his face grew even more concerned.
I thank you, Lord Baal, for your direct answer. I will await your government's official response and hope that it confirms your words. But then that means we are in far greater danger than we can imagine. Dangers? I asked Captain Sheridan to call an emergency meeting of the Council. I'll tell you everything there if you don't mind. Of course I nod. I don't remember the Captain sending a notification about the Council, but perhaps it will arrive in the near future. I'm counting on it too, Denar nodded. The matter cannot be delayed. As long as it's not too late, we did not raise any more important topics in the conversation, limiting ourselves to simple small talk between two ambassadors as far as such a thing is possible in principle.
But I thought of the information received from Jakar. It is obvious that the long paws of the shadows, or one of their followers, like the Drach, are visible from a mile away, the destruction of their base. And it is equally obvious that the Narn ambassador will continue to dig simply to find out exactly what happened and, if his guesses are correct, to try to somehow prepare everyone else for the invasion of the darkness from ancient legends. I didn't see any particular need to interfere with the process. The local species would solve all their problems themselves. But that didn't mean I wouldn't take advantage of the situation. After all, you can fish well in muddy water without attracting too much attention from others. And I had to think about how exactly to take advantage of this muddy water. Interlude. The Babylon 5 Advisory Council met in a reduced format this time. Despite all of Jakar's concerns, he was not confident in his conclusions, and therefore preferred to first convey the results of his research only to the members of the Council itself, without involving representatives of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds. And in any case, the more participants there were, the more difficult it would be to gather them in a short time, and the issue that worried the Narn ambassador did not tolerate delay. However, this time, Delenn was the only representative absent. Even Kosh, contrary to his custom, honored the meeting with his presence. So, Ambassador Jakar, you ask for a council meeting, Sheridan said, looking carefully at those present. Since Ambassador Delenn, as well as her attaché Lenier, are absent and will not be able to join us, I suggest that everyone else begin here. Thank you, Captain, the Narn bowed briefly. Esteemed members of the Council, some time ago, our base located in Sector 37 was destroyed. I declare right away
Londo jumped up loudly. That the Centauri Republic has nothing to do with this incident. Ambassador Mollari, Kikar sighed, interrupted at the very beginning of his speech. If you had waited literally 30 seconds, you would have realized that no one is accusing you of this. Who knows you? Mollari threw up his hands. Continue, Ambassador, Sheridan asked. Yes, so some time ago our base in Sector 37 was destroyed. In fact, we learned about what happened with some delay, and only because this base simply stopped communicating. No distress signals were recorded, no appearance of enemy ships. The cruiser on duty in that area of space was also unable to fight back, having been destroyed in the first moments of the attack. Attacks, Sheridan frowned. Someone attacked the base after all. Do you have any idea who it could be? I personally flew there to investigate. The Narn leaned heavily on the table. We found nothing in the attack zone, no survivors, no escape pods, only a debris field. No existing civilization is capable of destroying a military outpost so quickly and cleanly. Unless, the man glanced tensely at Kosh, the Vorlon ships, whose capabilities no one knows in detail. In response to the unspoken question, the Vorlon only tilted his spacesuit helmet slightly, narrowing the aperture of his eye. Only after 3 long moments did Kosh, as if pondering whether he should answer at all, shake his head, although without saying a word. From all the information received, Jakar sighed once again, I can only draw one conclusion, even though it seems incredible to me. The ancient enemy described in our sacred books has returned. Only they, according to legends, had such monstrous capabilities and overwhelming power. Entire worlds of our people simply disappeared, swept away from the vastness of the galaxy. And what is most frightening, worlds from legends, planets, according to the scriptures that belong to this enemy in ancient times, planets that have been empty for 1,000 years. They are no longer empty. There is something there, something has awakened. And if I am right, danger threatens us all. A tense silence fell over the council chamber. Even Londo, who had been acting cocky and indignant at the beginning of the ambassador's speech, fell silent, digesting the information he had heard. Finally, Sheridan, who had been frowning all this time, asked a question that was entirely logical given the situation. You're saying that the planets that once belonged to this race are inhabited again? Jakar nodded. But what if they were simply colonized by someone, not necessarily a race we know? Sheridan glanced sideways at Baal, who was sitting on a chair in the corner. But someone knew. No! I'm sure it was them! We were attacked while leaving Sector 37. Only 2 ships miraculously survived. The shape of the ships that attacked us there matches Gakwan's descriptions. The images that have survived to this day. Then why didn't the Narn oligarchy make an official statement? Londo threw up his hands. Why did you call the council personally, and not on behalf of your government? I conveyed the same information to them, but Kari still had doubts. But then, Ambassador, Captain Sheridan shook his head, we are back where we started. Your information is very important. It raises concerns, but for any active reaction we need evidence. None of our governments will agree to do something based only on ancient legends and the word of one Narn. No offense to you, Ambassador Jakar. I understand that too, Captain.
The evidence will soon be there.
Despite the skepticism of some Hari representatives, I managed to get a ship sent to the former main stronghold of the enemy, known to us from legends, to the cursed planet on the outskirts of the galaxy, known as Zhadum. It has been dead for 1,000 years. No one has been there. Even hyperspace routes bypass this zone of space for many systems. The ship should arrive there in 10 to 12 hours to check if there are traces of life on the planet or in its depths. As soon as the name of the planet was mentioned, Ambassador Kosh, who had been standing by the wall with an indifferent look, turned his head to the Narn, staring at him with an attentive gaze. It was obvious that for the Vorlon, the word Zhadum was not an empty sound. It was definitely familiar. Londo also perked up, obviously having heard this name before. But the Centauri was able to pull himself together quickly enough, returning his face to the skeptical polite expression with which he had been listening to his colleague's speech all this time. What if the planet is actually inhabited? What if the previous owners have returned? Although Sheridan voiced his doubts about the veracity of Jakar's information, deep down he could not help but admit that even the purely theoretical possibility of the reappearance of a civilization that had destroyed entire worlds of its enemies 1,000 years ago was not a topic he was prepared to treat lightly. then all our peoples are threatened with extermination. I still suggest not making such far-reaching apocalyptic statements until we have irrefutable evidence in hand. Londo slapped his palms on the table, rising to his feet. I do not doubt the words of Ambassador Jakar, but it is too early to do anything.
Let's wait for information from the ship sent on reconnaissance, and then we will decide.
Ambassador Mollari is right, Sheridan sighed. Ambassador Jakar, let me know as soon as you have more information, and we will reconvene the council for a more detailed discussion. It seems I have no other choice, gentlemen. The Nan spread his hands. Excellent. Then, if there are no more topics for conversation, I will swear by you. I still have things to do. Londo bowed briefly and quickly left the hall. The Centauri was followed by the silent Kosh and then Jakar, clearly annoyed by the outcome of the meeting, but having nothing to say in the current situation. Lord Baal? The Babylon 5 commander turned to the remaining seated Goa'uld representative. Do you have any comments on Ambassador Jakar's remarks? Not exactly comments, Captain. The man shook his head, rising to his feet and coming closer to the table. I'm not sure. It's just that I never cease to be amazed at how your civilizations, with such a strong commitment to officialdom and bureaucracy, managed to develop to such impressive results. What do you mean? The man didn't understand. No, Baal put his hands in front of him. I understand your governments perfectly well. Ancient legends, written in some literary sources, telling about a war centuries ago, about which no other information remains except these same literary sources. What sane person, reasonable person would believe that the creatures from the legends not only really existed, but also returned here and now. But still, do you know anything about the enemy the Narns spoke of? Nothing specific, Captain Sheridan. The man shook his head. I've just seen enough to know that such legends don't just appear out of nowhere, and even with all the possible exaggerations, the destruction of entire worlds sounds alarming, don't you think?
John stopped mid-sentence, deep in thought. Something in Baal's words made the captain wary, and the whole situation in general, despite Londo's frivolity, despite Kosh's eternal inaction, caused the man certain concerns. He was a military man, and he knew better than anyone what problems could result from neglecting dangerous information, even if it now seemed unreliable. I will inform my command of Ambassador Jakar's concerns. The captain finally exhaled. But I am more than sure that my words will simply be waved aside if I do not back them up with evidence. Well, in that case, at least you'll have the moral right to say I told you so when things go wrong. Baal laughed. But seriously, I think it's worth waiting for the intelligence results. Sometimes even the lack of results is a result that says no more than the most detailed intelligence data. That's true. By the way, Sheridan leaned forward with interest. Since we were talking about bureaucracy, tell me, Lord Baal, what kind of government system does your empire have? Well, John hesitated. I mean, I understand that it is an empire, but looking at the Centauri Republic with the Emperor at its head, I am already prepared for any twists of logic alien to humans. Oh, Baal drawled thoughtfully, stroking his beard with a smile. If I were to adapt this to terms that are familiar to you, I would say that we have a totalitarian, enlightened monarchy of a feudal republican bent. A ringing silence reigned in the council chamber, interrupted only by the barely audible hum of the ventilation system working at the station. Sheridan tried to digest the list of terms he had heard which, although each one was familiar to him individually, all together, in one sentence and, moreover, within the framework of a single form of government. Damn it, he wasn't sure that such a thing was even possible, at least theoretically, let alone in a state that actually existed and developed over many thousands of years. Sorry? But is that even possible? Why not? Baal raised an eyebrow. Totalitarianism is complete control over the life of society. Enlightenment is the primacy of science over superstition and religious dogma, as well as secular traditions. The monarchy at the head of the empire is, the Goa'uld grinned, as you might guess, the Emperor, who is the highest and absolute power and the source of law. In addition, in our state there is a council of system lords, each of whom governs a separate region of the empire, and within the framework of his possessions, is vested with supreme power, exactly to the extent that it does not contradict the will of the Emperor.
Feudal? That means that each lord in his possessions is a king and a god and can do any crap if it does not contradict the will of the emperor.
Well, and the most influential lords.
The man scratched his eyebrow. If I haven't missed any news from home, there should be 13 of them now. Make up the Council of System Lords, which meets to resolve issues in which the power of an individual lord is not enough. But there is no need to involve the emperor yet. This is, by the way, about the feudal republican bias. Unbelievable, was all John could breathe out. Lord Baal's explanations not only did not make his words easier to understand, they, on the contrary, made the captain's mind strain even more. Strain and understand that he understood absolutely nothing. No, the interpretation of each of the terms voiced by the ambassador did not contradict what he himself knew from the Naval Academy, and in one bundle they looked in general to complement each other well. But that doesn't happen. We have come a long way to such a system, Captain Sheridan, Baal said with a patronizing note in his voice.
And I can fully understand that for representatives of other civilizations, my words may sound like complete nonsense. But I assure you it works. Moreover, the man thoughtfully stroked his beard, looking slyly at his interlocutor. In the history of your planet, there was a state that practically achieved similar results. They just did something wrong on such a long path. Was there a similar government system in the history of the Earth? Well, yes, nodded Baal. Communism. At least this earthly term is the closest in its meaning and essence. At that moment, John was incredibly glad that he hadn't gotten up from his chair. Accidentally sitting down in front of the ambassador of another state would not have been the most diplomatic action in his entire career. Londo thoughtfully twirled an empty glass in his hands, looking at the wall in front of him.
For the umpteenth time in the last year, he had the feeling that everything around him, including himself, was rolling into the deepest hole, and the more he tried to do for his people, the deeper the hole would be ahead. And he could no longer do nothing. People had an expression, a little claw gets stuck, the whole bird disappears. He felt like that very bird. All he could do was hope that he would be able to catch the moment to jump off in time, preferably without nightmarish consequences for himself and the state. That was why he continued to behave in public as before, kept up appearances, even though it was becoming increasingly difficult with each passing day. Mr. Morden, who had so kindly and timely provided him with help and assistance in matters of opposing Narn, was one big bone in the throat of the Centauri ambassador.
Then, almost a year ago, Mollari had given in to his emotions, allowed himself to be drawn into some kind of intrigue, which, as he believed, was still far from over. And what he disliked more than anything else, he had absolutely no idea what the ultimate goal of this intrigue might be, and what role his people would be assigned. Sometimes, this greatly frightened the Centauri, who considered himself far from stupid. "You wanted to see me, Ambassador Mollari?" The doorbell rang and Morden entered the cabin with a demonstratively polite smile. "You asked me to report anything unusual if it was connected to the border worlds." Londo looked at his guest with a keen eye. "According to my information, the Narn have sent a warship to one of these planets, Zadum." Morden's smile slipped from his face for a moment, replaced by confusion, tension, and active thought. "You've heard this name before, I suppose?"
Only out of the corner of his ear, the man shook his head, squinting slightly and again smiling politely, almost cloyingly. "Do you by any chance know when this ship could arrive there?" "I know by chance," Mollari nodded. "In about 10 hours. I understand you. Thank you very much for the information, Ambassador Mollari." Morden smiled even wider than before, only the man's eyes, his eyes became sharp and cold. "I understand that there was just a council meeting on this matter." "Yes, but where are you from?" Londo frowned. "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Tell me, Ambassador." Morden grabbed his chin with his fingers, for a moment reminding Londo of Lord Baal and even making him tense up from such an association. "How did the members of the council react to this information?" "To send a Narn ship to the Zadum?" the Centauri asked, puzzled. "Exactly," Mr. Morden nodded. I suppose they were as confused as I am now."
Ambassador Jekar told the council some ancient legends described in their holy books. Londo grimaced. Something about the great enemy, who destroyed entire planets in ancient times. I see. Morden narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. Yes, but it seems no one believed him, which is why he was forced to send a ship to investigate. Well, except for Captain Sheridan, perhaps. Mollari shrugged. But he too, I suppose, simply decided to play it safe, just in case. That's what you humans do, isn't it? It's true. Morden answered distantly, as if listening to something Mollari couldn't hear, or deep in thought over his words. Well, Ambassador Mollari. The man perked up, visibly relaxing and smiling broadly. Thank you for the timely information and assistance. And now, allow me to take my leave. I suddenly had important matters that require my attention.
The next moment, Morden, without waiting for the ambassador's response to his words, turned sharply and quickly left the room. Along with him, the feeling of cold goosebumps that accompanied almost every personal conversation with Londo left. Exhaling irritably, Mollari stood for a few seconds, staring at the closed door of the cabin, and then took a bottle of his favorite wine from the bar, which was already beginning to show the bottom. The ambassador's job was nervous and thankless. Triluminary, a high-tech device the size of a pack of cigarettes, consisting of 50 grams of platinum-silver alloy, complexly structured carbon, and a scattering of other rare minerals in varying quantities, including quantum-40. In essence, the artifact was exactly what it looked like, a small microcircuit suspended in the center of a triangular structure made of precious wire.
The architecture was completely unlike anything currently existing in the galaxy, at least among the civilizations known in this part of space. Triluminaries were probably the product of an unknown or long-forgotten alien race that left no trace of itself, whether by force or by design. From what I could remember, the artifact was used by the Minbari for something like stasis paralysis, reading the memories of sentience, selective memory erasure, and a valence soul detector that determined spiritual kinship with their ancient saint. During the study of the structure, the replicators did not find any external controls on the triluminary, which, with a probability of 90.457%, meant some kind of telepathic control. However, since Delenn was not a full-fledged telepath, most likely it was simply meant that she had a living mind and the telepathy gene determined by the artifact. In any case, a more thorough study in lab conditions will give more information. Curious. And the most curious thing was that, with all its capabilities, with all its architecture and its main purpose, the Triluminary seemed to be nothing more than a device for ultra-long-range communication, something remotely reminiscent of the long-range stones created by the ancients in the Replicators' home universe. The principles of creation were different, the materials were completely different, but the common features in the structure were obvious even to me, a human, not to mention the community of replicators which had absorbed the technological achievements of hundreds, if not thousands of civilizations. The conclusions of the research complex were confirmed by practical experiments. 2 copies of the Triluminary were created using the Asgard teleporter in the atomic printer mode and transferred to 2 necks from the last grown batch, awakened especially for this purpose. The catgirls located at opposite ends of the complex, and in fact at opposite poles of the planet, simultaneously took the artifacts in their hands, and then everything happened almost the same as in the case of the long-distance stones, with the only difference that the test subjects did not exchange consciousnesses, but began to see as if with 2 pairs of eyes at the same time, without experiencing any inconvenience about this. The replicators carefully recorded all the girls' physiological indicators, recording in real time what they saw in front of them. Each of the triluminary users continued to perceive the surrounding space normally, while knowing that they also had the opportunity to look through the eyes of the interlocutor connected to them.
The system looked frankly strange, but it was implemented in its own way brilliantly. There was nothing even remotely resembling a power source inside the triluminary, but the artifact worked successfully, powered by the background electromagnetic radiation of the environment and the living organism of the operator. An excellent illustration of the word optimization. For a moment, realizing what had fallen into my greedy hands, I tensed up, preparing to abruptly break the connection.
destroying both artifacts in the lab, preparing the invasion fleet to be sent towards Minbar and all other methods of preventive reaction to unexpected problems. But nothing happened. The network of replicators through the brain-implanted NEC modules determined the communication channel between the two artifacts, stable and not weakening with increasing distance, at least within the framework of one planet. But there was nothing else.
Although the architecture of the artifact clearly showed that this system could support communication between at least a dozen subscribers simultaneously, from which 3 possible conclusions followed at the moment. None of the existing triluminaries in the galaxy were within stable communication range. None of them were in the hands of an intelligent operator, or the enlightened representatives of Minbar, who, as far as I knew, had the 3 triluminaries currently available, turned out to be techno-barbarians using an electron microscope as a hammer. Well, what else can you call intelligent beings who attached a complex crystal structure to a high-tech long-distance instant conference call device, turning the smartphone into a genetic constructor for creating human Minbari hybrids? Damn it, how did they even manage to do that? However, the problems of the Papuans should not worry the white man, right?
And I got my hands on a sample of technology that directly built a bridge between the living mind and machine communication. These still did not provide answers to all the questions that interested me, but such an unexpected add-on from the universe deserved unequivocal approval. The second object of the study was a fragment of the material that Ambassador Delenn's transformation cocoon was made of. Here, everything was not so impressive and much more prosaic and understandable. In essence, the cocoon was an organocrystalline shell designed to protect the living organism placed inside from the influence of the environment during the transformation process.
That same crystalline constructor, assembled by the Minbari as a pedestal for the triluminary, with a probability of 75.478%, acted simultaneously as an additional source of energy, a reserve of crystalline construction material, and an information carrier containing data on how and to what extent the physiology of the Minbari organism needed to be changed. At least, that was the conclusion reached by the replicator network while studying the structure of the cocoon and visual data about the structure assembled by Delenn obtained indirectly from the sensors of the junior replicators located on the deck of the Babylon embassy sector. The most paradoxical thing was the fact that the triluminary itself was used in this system. Practically, in no way.
I mean, the Minbari used the artifact's ability to provide communication between 2 intelligent beings, according to logic known only to them. They made an associative conclusion in the style of the unity and struggle of opposites, and as a result used the means of communication for communication of 2 mental and genetic maps with their subsequent mixing and obtaining the arithmetic mean at the output. Having received this data, I even understood for a second what exactly Corona felt and meant when he declared my irrationality and illogicality in behavior. But, as absurd as it was, the system worked. Moreover, if we forget for a moment that it couldn't be like that, simply because it could never be like that, the replicators gave a probability of a whopping 39.5845% that, by extrapolation, it was possible to adapt the design to create a hybrid of any biological species that were at least somewhat similar, if you were worried, as long as they had the DNA molecules at their core and a similar set of genes in volume. Human with Minbari, Narn with Drazi, Centauri with Lumati. Pick a design that was suitable in shape and crystal composition and you're done. For the first time in my entire presence on the station, I felt my body made up of microscopic and virtually indestructible nanites twitch an eye